Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. So, if you absolutely love piecing together incredibly complex puzzles, well, you're definitely in the right place today. We're going to play detective and try to solve one of the most famously fragmented lore mysteries in all of gaming history. We're diving headfirst into the universe of Dark Souls. You know, a game that's practically notorious for burying its story in random item descriptions and obscure environmental clues. Today, we're investigating what I like to call the Ornstein paradox.
Okay, let's dive into this. Consider this completely central question. If we, as the player, undeniably defeated and killed Dragonslayer Ornstein in the very first Dark Souls game, how on earth did his personal armor end up totally discarded at a place called Archdragon Peak in Dark Souls 3? I mean, that game takes place countless years later. It's this impossible survival story that has quite literally baffled the community for years. And today, we're going to crack the case.
But to really understand the paradox, we've got to establish our baseline facts first. Like, who exactly is our prime suspect? Dragonslayer Ornstein wasn't just some regular run-of-the-mill foot soldier. He was believed to be the captain of the Four Knights of Lord Gwyn. We're talking the highest-ranking elite soldiers in the entire pantheon of the gods. He was gifted the special Leo ring by his lord, and he was this legendary dragon hunter who commanded the element of lightning, which, if you remember, is the ultimate weakness of the ancient dragons. The guy was an absolute powerhouse.
And that brings us to his most famous moment by far, the Anor Londo encounter. If you've played the original Dark Souls, just looking at the Anor Londo Cathedral probably brings back some frustrating memories. You fight Ornstein in this incredibly legendary 2 versus 1 battle right alongside the cannibalistic executioner Smough. When you defeat Ornstein in this specific fight, his partner Smough literally crushes him to absorb his lightning powers. Plus, when you win the battle entirely, you actually get Ornstein's physical soul and his Leo ring in your inventory. So by all standard definitions of video game logic, his death here is absolute, which, makes his later appearances in the series so incredibly baffling.
Section 1. The Hard Evidence. Canonical item descriptions from Dark Souls 3.
So the crucial point is, to look past our own gameplay experience, we really have to examine the concrete facts from in-game items. Because in these games, item descriptions are pretty much as close to objective truth as we're ever going to get. Let's look at this direct quote from Smough's Great Hammer, which you find in Dark Souls 3. It reads, "Associated with Smough, the last knight to remain at his post, guarding the ruined cathedral." Guys, this one sentence is a massive revelation. It canonically proves that Ornstein did not stay in the Anor Londo Cathedral. It explicitly states Smough was the last knight remaining. That means Smough was left entirely alone.
And then, we find the Dragonslayer armor set in Dark Souls 3, and its description completely shatters our understanding of the timeline. Get this, it says, "In the Dragonless Age, this knight, who long guarded the ruined cathedral, left the land in search of the Nameless King." This explicit armor description completely contradicts our direct experience of literally killing him in the first game. He didn't die by our blade, he packed up and left to find a missing king. So suddenly the mystery of his true fate is a whole lot deeper.
What's really fascinating here is mapping out Ornstein's confirmed chronological path based strictly on that Dark Souls 3 lore. It structures our understanding perfectly. He starts out as a veteran of the ancient war. Then he spends the Golden Age guarding the cathedral. But then, and this is key, in the Dragonless Age, he completely abandons that post to search for the Nameless King. Finally, by the time we reach the literal end of the world, his physical armor is just found discarded on the ground at Archdragon Peak. That right there is the canonical journey.
Section 2. The Anomalies, Outliers, Imposters, and Possessed Armor.
But, as with any really good cold case, there are anomalies. We're talking bizarre encounters across the sequels that further complicate this already super convoluted timeline. And this brilliantly illustrates the problem. Compare these two directly. On side A, we've got the original Ornstein from Dark Souls 1, golden armor, commanding lightning, stationed in Anor Londo. But then on side B, we have a boss from Dark Souls 2 called the Old Dragonslayer. He looks exactly like Ornstein, but the armor's darkened, he uses dark hexes instead of lightning, and he's in a completely different location, the Cathedral of Blue. The stark differences here suggest something is terribly amiss. Like, is this the real Ornstein somehow corrupted by darkness, or is it something else entirely?
Furthermore, we've got yet another anomaly in Dark Souls 3, a boss simply named the Dragonslayer Armor. And actually, scratch that, it's not even a person at all. It's literally a disembodied set of rusted armor being puppeteered by these strange creatures called pilgrim butterflies. Crucially, it wields an axe and a great shield, which is completely different from Ornstein's iconic spear. The lore here heavily implies this is likely the armor of maybe a pupil or a copycat. Definitely not our prime suspect. It's basically a giant red herring in our investigation.
Section 3. The Community Verdicts, Reconciling the Ornstein Paradox.
So having laid out all the hard evidence and these weird anomalies, how do players actually reconcile all this? Well, our first major theory requires asking a bit of a Socratic question. Was the Anor Londo boss fight just a massive illusion created by Dark Sun Gwendolyn? I mean, we know Gwendolyn, the last remaining deity in Anor Londo, was a total master of illusions. He faked the sunlight itself and even the presence of his sister, Guinevere. So, could he have faked Ornstein too?
Let's weigh the evidence objectively here. On the side supporting the illusion, it totally makes sense. Gwendolyn had the motive to create formidable guards, and we know for a fact he faked other enemies in the area. But look at the evidence against it. When you hit the Guinevere illusion, it instantly vanishes. Poof. But when you defeat Ornstein, he fights to the bitter end. Smough physically interacts with his body, and you receive a real, highly powerful soul and a tangible ring. Because of all that, it is incredibly hard to write off the entire brutal boss fight as just a mere phantom.
So what about the timeline theory? As the beloved character Solaire famously tells us, the flow of time itself is convoluted in this universe. This theory basically suggests that we might have killed one timeline's Ornstein in the first game, while the Ornstein who journeyed to Archdragon Peak in the third game is from like an alternate reality where he abandoned his post early. And yeah, while this technically fixes the plot holes, a lot of players find it to be a pretty unsatisfying narrative cop-out. It feels a bit like waving away a really cool mystery with a magic time travel wand, you know?
Let's move on and see how this builds into our understanding of the sequels. Because if we assume the real Ornstein really did leave his post before the events of the first game, who exactly did we fight in Dark Souls 2's Cathedral of Blue? Well, this brings us perfectly to the imposter theory. Just consider the specific clues presented in the Cathedral of Blue. First off, the armor completely lacks that iconic golden glow. Secondly, the boss uses dark hexes, magic that directly opposes the divine lightning Ornstein was so famous for. Even the game's item descriptions seem to hesitate to use his real name, vaguely calling the boss reminiscent of old legends. So the prevailing thought here is that this old Dragonslayer was merely an imitator paying homage to the legendary captain. Perhaps he was one of the newer Kingdom's dragon riders who just adopted a really famous guise.
Section 4. The Final Destination, Archdragon Peak, and the Nameless King.
All right, we've cleared away the illusions and the imposters, and now we're arriving at the absolute most spectacular, tragic community theory of them all. To understand his end, we really have to understand his motivation. Why on earth did Ornstein leave his sacred post? Well, it was to find the Nameless King. This king was Lord Gwyn's exiled firstborn son, a former god of war who committed the ultimate treason. He actually allied with the ancient dragons he was meant to destroy. Because of this, his name was erased from history entirely. Yet Ornstein, the premier Dragonslayer, harbored ultimate loyalty to his disgraced former master and set out across the ruined world just to find him. Which leads us to the totally mind-blowing dragon transformation theory. Think about this. When you finally reach the Nameless King, Ornstein's armor is just sitting there on the ground. There is no corpse inside it. We know from the game's lore that devotees who reach this peak attempt to shed their humanity and literally transform into dragons. And when you fight the Nameless King, he rides a massive beast called the King of the Storm. Now, this specific drake commands lightning, which perfectly matches Ornstein's unique element. And in a really haunting echo of the past, when the beast falls, the Nameless King absorbs its soul to power up, which perfectly mirrors how Smough absorbed Ornstein's power all those centuries ago. It's just a staggering realization, isn't it? We really have to ask ourselves, did the fiercely loyal knight finally reunite with his exiled master, only to shed his golden armor and become the very beast he once swore to slay? It's a theory that perfectly, brilliantly summarizes the tragedy of his character, going from a legendary Dragonslayer to a literal dragon, ultimately dying at the hands of the player while still serving the master he searched across eras to find. It's a beautiful, deeply melancholy conclusion to the Ornstein paradox, and honestly, it's the exact kind of brilliant storytelling that makes this lore so endlessly fascinating to dive into. Thanks so much for exploring this mystery with me, and I hope it leaves you hungry to uncover even more secrets hiding in the world around you.